Hi, welcome to the Elle Russ Show, where I deliver content intended to inspire, educate, and motivate. Engage with me online at elleruss.com and on social media. Enjoy the show. Hey everyone, today my guest is Brock Armstrong. I don't even know where to begin. He is so decorated with so many things in the health, wellness, fitness, mindset movement. He has worked with Mark Sisson, Dave Asprey, Ben Greenfield, Mark Divine. He's got an amazing podcast called the Upgraded Fitness Podcast, as well as coaching programs and more. Welcome to the show, Brock.
Thanks, Elle. It's awesome to be here. And I know it's hard to pin me down. I kind of, I'm one of those people that I always tell this story. Like one day, probably 10 years ago, walking down the street, more than full-time employed, I should add at this point, walking down the street, saw a wanted ad, like a job ad in the window of my favorite bike shop. They were looking for a mechanic. And I was like, ooh, should I apply? Like, that's always my default setting is like, that sounds awesome. I want to do that. So yeah, I've been a ballet dancer. I've been a musician. I've been an actor. I've been a desk worker at the government. I've been a web developer. I've been an audio engineer. And yeah, it's sort of all culminated now really in being a podcaster and an educator. So it has come to some sort of a head at this point, but it's a meandering course. And you're also meandering, so I know you understand.
I'm right there with you. Yeah, we followed what we loved, and we just kept going, which I think is a great example to the audience as well. I believe you would say, and we can get into some details in a minute, but some of your endeavors led to other endeavors you could not have imagined had you not chosen that first thing, right? So, and that starts even with me working for Mark Sisson. And when I first met you, and you worked with us at Primal Blueprint, and then you moved on and you engineered Dave Asprey's Bulletproof Radio. You've always sort of been around the health industry, not only as an expert, but as someone who's helping other experts achieve their goals like mine. You, for the audience, Brock did my audiobook and the intros to the podcast and things like that. You've engineered many of our audiobooks over the years, but let's talk about you. I want to talk about your fitness journey, and we know where you are now, and we're going to get into the meat of that. How did you start? Were you always athletic? Were you always interested in this?
I always was very active, just a active kid, always on my bike, always running around. I was in dance lessons, piano lessons, like every kind of lesson you could possibly be in, swimming lessons, everything as a kid. So movement was always part of my life. And I'm very, very grateful for that. I grew up in a time especially in sort of Northern Canada, where it was that good old 70s parenting where it's like, okay, go outside and play, kids, and we don't want to see you until dinner time, kind of a thing. So I feel very grateful to have been born in a time when that was sort of the norm. That was absolutely like the way that we were raised, was given our autonomy to just go and explore the world and explore our capabilities, develop the confidence and self-reliance that that's really served us well, I think, as a generation. But I'm nostalgic for those days and those times, and feel very lucky we grew up then, because God knows what would have happened if there was like social media back then. I'd probably be deleting, right.
Like, who knows? I'm so glad I didn't have to grow up with that. But, now on the heels of you turning 50 this year, and you saying how excited you are, to turn 50. And by the way, take a look, audience, at what Brock looks like, because that's the poster child for what 50 should be. And, I feel like I've been around a bunch of you guys for a while, like Mark Sisson, Brad Kearns, right? You guys are the epitome of what, I want to be, what I wanted to be, what people can be at a certain age. And it's never really too late. Let's talk a little bit about your journey with coaching, because you've been coaching people forever in terms of movement, wellness, health, and even mindset. So I'd love you to talk a little bit about, where that started and how that's evolved.
Yeah, definitely. I have, I really love coaching. It is a great passion of mine, and something that I actually just sort of fell into because of some health issues. So I'm going to take a step back and go way back to the early 2000s. when I was working for the government, and I was, having that good old desk job, sitting all day, probably eating out more than I should, probably drinking a little more alcohol than I probably should, not necessarily sucking the marrow from life. It's hard to do that when you're sitting at a desk typing all day. But the good thing was, I'm going to put those in big air quotes, was that at a certain point, through no fault of my own, this wasn't a lifestyle issue, but I got an infection in my pericardium. So the sac that goes around the heart that sort of holds your heart in, and the myocardium, they don't really differentiate. So I had pericarditis or myocarditis.
How does this happen? And what are the symptoms you experienced to even know something was off?
Well, there was no missing the symptoms. How it happens is basically bad luck. It's very similar to the way we get a throat infection or a sinus infection or anything like that. The bug happened to decide to just take up residence in that part of my body. Could have very easily gone somewhere else, but it ended up in my heart. And the
son
symptom,
of a bitch.
yeah. So like I said, like it wasn't, luckily I did have a reasonably, like, I know I painted a bit of a grim picture there talking about being sedentary and drinking too much and eating out too much and stuff like that. But I still was pretty darn healthy, thank goodness, because it did help me recover eventually from this and not suffer too much. Again, big air quotes. But the symptoms were extraordinarily hard to miss. Like basically I had to not be too gross, I had diarrhea and vomiting for a couple of days, feeling really crappy. And then basically at 4:00 in the morning, I think it was on the third day of this, what seemed like a stomach bug, I felt like an elephant was standing on my chest. I couldn't catch my breath. I was sweating. I basically just felt like my chest was imploding on itself. So I did what any reasonable person would do, which is phone my sister and say, I don't know what's going on. Can you come and get me and take me to the hospital? And this is like 4 a.m. And she's like, oh, okay. Yeah, I have to be at work though. So just give me a bit. So like, I'm not blaming my sister, but she took a couple hours. She showed up at my doorstep, like full face of makeup, hair done, all ready to go to work and stuff, because she figured she's going to drop me off at the hospital and then go to work. So by that time I'd taken a Gravol and was feeling a little bit better and said, oh, I don't think I really need to go to the hospital after all. And she was like, no, I got up and came here. I'm taking you to the damn hospital. So we go to the hospital, go to the emergency room. They see a person in clear cardiac distress, ran the blood tests and stuff, and told me, like, point blank, you've had a heart attack. We're taking you to give you an angiogram. And I was like, no, I haven't had a heart attack. What are you talking about? I've just got a stomach bug. And they're like, nope, you've had a heart attack. We're taking you for an angiogram. Sign this piece of paper. And I was like, what if I say no? And they, well, we'll convince you to say yes because you need an angiogram. You've had a heart attack. Here we go. They were wrong. I hadn't had a heart attack. There was no blockage or anything like that. It was just like I said, I had that infection. So basically my heart was getting squished by itself and by the pericardium. So yeah, for the next, I had what was referred to as recurrent pericarditis, which means I had it several times over the next 18 months and ended up back in the hospital a couple of times, spent 5 or 6 days in the cardiac unit, not allowed to get out of bed, like that kind of thing. And eventually, luckily, I recovered, but in the meantime, developed a hell of a generalized anxiety disorder, especially around health-related matters. So even though my heart was healthy again, and I had actually escaped with no damage, no lasting repercussions from it, I still had this anxiety. And I kept going back to my cardiologist saying, like, look, there's something wrong. It's still there. And he's saying, look, it's not, you're really okay. And then flippantly, my cardiologist said to me, you know what you need to do is run a marathon or something like that to prove to yourself that you're okay. And I was like, oh, run marathon equals feeling okay? all right. So I signed up for
You're
a
like, I have
marathon.
some experience there. Watch me. I'm going to
I
go rack
didn't,
one up right now.
you know, at that point, I had never done a race.
Oh,
I had
really?
been a professional dancer and been an avid bike rider and stuff, but I'd never actually done a race. So that was the beginning
Get
of
it.
my endurance athletic
So do
career.
you keep doing the endurance things just to keep proving to yourself? Is that what keeps you up with the anxiety? Just every time you get anxious, you're like, I've got to sign up for another triathlon.
Yeah.
Damn it.
You know what? It works.
Apparently, yeah. No, that's great. That must have been really scary. I can imagine too. It's your heart.
Yeah.
It's just like your heart or your brain. Forget it. That's like, anything you feel, right? You have a slight headache, you're gonna be like, oh my God, the tumor's back. Or right, or you're
Yeah.
having anxiety, which as you described when you were having the issues with the condition, kind of mimic what an anxiety attack feels like, right? That
Right.
heaviness on the chest. So I can totally understand like the PTSD from that, event over months of then coming back and being like, oh, is that it? When you're just having some anxiety.
Right.
After you proved it to yourself after that first race, did you finally feel a little bit better?
It helped. It definitely helped. And it started me on a road to a much healthier version of myself. And that's really what got me interested in working with and following people like Mark Sisson and Ben Greenfield and Dave Asprey. And I started seeking out these people and places of knowledge to actually figure out how to ensure that something like that doesn't happen again. Of course, there's like bad luck is always a factor, but just trying to stack the deck in my favor. And luckily, I had the skill set to be able to actually make a living at the same time as learning from all these people. So I was very lucky with that. But it really did, my anxiety and all of the issues that came from having that illness didn't really resolve until I discovered something called cognitive behavior therapy or theory. And I was very lucky.
Can you share with us a little bit about, for the people that don't know, like what is that and how might it different than other modes of therapy?
Yeah, and I tried many modes of therapy before. My doctor finally sent me to a CBT practitioner, and I tried the hypnotherapy. I tried just sort of regular talk therapy, and a lot of them helped a lot. Like definitely got me on the road to recovery. But then cognitive behavior therapy really, it resonated so well with me because it doesn't place the blame on, you don't have to relive trauma from your childhood. You don't need to think about, when did my mother do me wrong? And unfortunately, I think the mothers get blamed an awful lot for a lot of things. But cognitive behavior therapy and cognitive behavior theory is really addressing your own belief system and realizing that you are in control of the way that you react, the way that you view, the way that you see the world, and gives you the ability to look at those reactions and decide whether or not they're still serving you. Because many of the beliefs and many of the reactions that we have to the world around us maybe were based on something that happened in our past, maybe a belief that were passed on to us from a caregiver of some sort, an allo parent or a parent. And it probably had a good goal at some point in your life. But later on in life, if we're still hanging on to those and those reactions aren't serving us any longer, then we sometimes feel like we're just locked in. Like you hear people say like, oh, well, it's just the way I was raised. Well, okay, you can be raised that way, but you can still change it.
Yeah,
And
that's a tough one for me. And I want to interject and just say,
sure.
I want to highlight that because this happens so much of the time. And in my book, Confident as Fuck, I talk about this, which is like, you have to parent yourself. If you're at a point where you are aware that you weren't brought the greatest parents or childhood, then you're really letting their stories of you, their treatment of you win, instead of taking control and going, okay, well, you know what? I'm going to parent myself now. That's really all we can do. But yes, there's been so many people. I had a client who, over 50, who, let's say you made a comment, their response would be something like, well, yeah, because you were raised differently than me. You see, I was, and it would be like, record scratch, hey, cut that off. again, it's the story of continually imprinting what they kind of imprinted in you. It's adopting the story of them for ourselves. And so many of our beliefs come from places like this.
It's true. They really, really do. And it doesn't have to be something as, it doesn't have to be bad parenting either. I think a lot of the time we tend to only think that these things are a problem if they were something that was harmful or something that was hurtful in our past. But like I said, most of the time, or a lot of the time, it can be something that did serve a purpose and kept us safe when we were children, when we were teens, like even maybe early 20s, but that doesn't mean that it still has to be in place now. If it has stopped, if it has served its purpose and we've moved on to a different part of our life, being able to recognize those feelings and those reactions to certain circumstances, to the way that we're treated, to the way that a car cuts us off in traffic and how we react to it, we can take a moment and say, wait a second, why did I react that way? And in the end, it's like, well, it doesn't really even matter why I reacted that way. I don't want to react that way anymore. So how else can I view this situation in order to make it actually not trigger me? You tell a great story in your book, Confident as Fuck, about the deciding that the cyclists on the road weren't actually idiots because it wasn't serving you to stir up vitriol against these people who are just cycling. And I would have been that person cycling.
Oh, you and Brad would have been. I would have like just absolutely been, steaming in my car. You guys rolling by on your bikes. Well, and also too, like you said, it can be something very minor. For example, and this is, so some people think of, right, like, oh, you have to have some big trauma, or then you're kind of dispelling that myth. You don't have to. There are still certain things. I like that you brought up the car. So once I learned about cortisol and how it affects us and all of the things that you already know, I started to realize that, so let's say someone cuts you off on the road and you have that initial surge, right, of cortisol, adrenaline, you're like, oh, your heart's pumping. You just feel like, oh, you almost near miss died, that kind of moment. And we all have those moments. It's just in that moment, I started to, after I learned what we know is, okay, hold on a second, breathe it out. Because if I don't get out of this feeling right now, which is a flight, fear, and the fear's not real, the car's already passed, I'm still on the road, nothing happened. I'm breathing it out because I know that cortisol is going to surge for like another 15 minutes or longer if I were to pick up the phone, oh my God, some jerk just cut me off, or continued in the anger or weirdness or fear that was generated by this event that is now over. And so even those small moments, everyone listening, when you notice, and how do you know? Because it doesn't feel good. Your heart's racing, something's off. And unless there's a clear and present danger at that moment, usually they are just the near misses of life, like the car going by. But those are moments that could affect our health negatively if we let our mind roll.
Absolutely. Yeah, that very well said. We're also a species that loves to relive and re-feel things over and over again. And like you said, like you could take that moment that you were driving in the car and you were cut off and then tell somebody about it on the phone, tell somebody about it at work, and then relive it again. And these things just, it ends up really affecting our health in such a negative way. And we get addicted to those feelings too. I was recently, sorry, Mom, I'm going to pick on you here, but it's really, I'm picking on news, television news. My mom is one of those people, she has a TV in her bedroom. And I was visiting her for the last week or so. And every morning I'd come upstairs and do my movement routine and be making my coffee. And I can hear the TV in her bedroom telling the same bad news. Basically, every 15 minutes, they said they went through the same 6 bad news stories ad nauseum, and it was exactly the same script, exactly the same information, no new information, no indication of how you could help this situation or how you could change it or whether it affects your life. It's just, here are 6 terrible things that are happening in the world right now, and we're going to repeat them over and over again every 10 minutes for the next 2 hours. And somehow we get addicted to that, and we start to do it to ourselves, replaying our own bad news stories over and over again. And and this is we've sort of deviated a little bit from cognitive behavior theory, but being able to recognize that kind of stuff and being able to recognize how it makes us feel and how it's not helpful, and then reprogram. And basically the reprogramming that I wanted my mom to do was to turn off the TV. Yeah, our mutual friend Alessandra Wall, Dr. Alessandra Wall, had this great phrase that she shared with me a little while ago. That was, check in with yourself before you check in with the world. And I think if we all started doing that a little bit more in the mornings, especially like when we wake up, spend some time checking in with yourself before you worry about checking in with the world, we might be able to handle those sort of situations a little bit better. But anyway, now I'm just picking on TV news and my mom. Sorry, Mom. But
no, but it is very important. And this is, look, a lot of people have morning routines for a reason. It is also when your subconscious is really ripe for imprinting. It's a great time to do meditation or gratitude or reflection. And
or nothing.
Just stare at a wall and drink some coffee. Absolutely. Or just do nothing and get settled with yourself and your day in the world and your goals and dreams before you head out there. And if you're not in the right space, avoid it. I think I was never a news watcher. And I was sort of anti it for many years until, a lot of stuff happened in this country in the past few years. And, there was just all this sensationalism. And so I found myself getting pretty addicted, and I literally had to cut myself off like a drug or a food or anything else. I had to cut myself off. I was like, I'm limiting myself to one show. And then it was like, no shows. I'm just going to read headlines. So much time wasted on it, but also again, fueling this a negative story of some kind that's not even yours. And if you're not in the right place for it, or if you're trying to heal from something, that's my suggestion. Don't do it at all. Read a couple headlines and get out of it. Or what we do is, I noticed back in the day, you see a headline, let's say like 30,000 people killed in an earthquake. Okay. You know what? I got the gist. But if I click on that damn article, now I'm going to see a worse story about the boy under the rubble, getting trapped, losing his leg, right? And on and on. And now I'm just even further down. And
it's
so
porn.
it is. I just stopped clicking. I was like, oh my gosh, didn't I get what I needed to know from the headline? 30,000 people died in an earthquake. Okay, that's bad. I don't need to go look at the details. And I think we're so conditioned to look for the bad, but not look for the good, not replay the good stories. So let's talk about that, because I feel like that's an important part. How soon we forget our mercies that were given to us in life, like near misses, and how soon we forget the wonderful things that have happened. And we don't often replay those.
Yeah, it's true. We really do as a species. And this always comes up when we're talking about finances. People tend to relive or remember the stock market crashes or the big times that we've lost a bunch of money. We don't necessarily focus on the times that we've actually been doing just fine, because it's not exciting and it doesn't kick off that cascade of hormones in our bodies. And I guess going back to your original question about how I sort of incorporated this into my coaching, is that, I spent years when I first got certified as a marathon and triathlon coach and started working with people. It became quite apparent to me quite quickly that there were a few people who hired me that were very talented athletes who were really focused on just being the best triathlete or the best cyclist or whatever they were focused on, the best that they could possibly be. But the vast majority of people who came to me and said, I want to do a marathon, or I want to do a triathlon, I want to do an ultra race, their goal was they wanted to do this race, absolutely. But underlying all of that was this desire to really just feel better about themselves. A lot of the time it had something to do with weight loss, or it had something to do with confidence or self-worth, self-esteem. And I would do my due diligence as a marathon or triathlon coach and give them all of the meal plans and give them the workout plans and get them across that finish line. And they did cross that finish line. I never had anyone fall apart and miss their goal race. But the problem was, at the end of that endeavor, there was still that hole, there was still that emptiness, or there was still that desire, or maybe they lost some weight while they were doing the marathon or training for the marathon. And then they'd gain it back as soon as there wasn't a marathon. So they'd come back to me again and say, hey, I really want to sign up for this next race. And once I realized,
like yo-yo marathoning instead of
yes, it's a very extreme form of yo-yo dieting. But I found myself getting incredibly frustrated trying to work with these people, or trying to actually help them, because I actually heard myself saying the words on a number of occasions: you don't need another race. What you need to do is reset your relationship with food and movement. Because it was the relationship with food and movement was so broken that they thought they had to sign up for something as extreme as a marathon or ultra marathon or an Ironman or something in order to control their diet and control their movement. And without that, they would completely fall apart. And I don't think this is an unusual story.
No.
So once I realized that, and I got so frustrated not being able to really help people reset that relationship with food and movement, I actually recently became a certified practitioner of cognitive behavior theory. And I've started developing programs that are very specifically there to address that. And I've actually stopped coaching. If somebody really wanted me to, I would still coach them for a marathon or a triathlon, but I haven't actually in years. I've just taken on the role of being somebody who, and this is sort of my catchphrase, and I'll give Katy Bowman full credit for inspiring this catchphrase, but my whole goal in life is to help people move more of their body more often in more and more interesting ways. Not run a race, not do anything extreme, because those are fun. Those are really fun goals. I still do races because I really enjoy the racing aspect, but I know that's not how I'm going to make myself more healthy, or how I'm going to achieve happiness and self-esteem and a healthy body composition and a healthy mind-body connection and all of that kind of stuff that really does have an impact on our entire life, other than just checking something off of a bucket list. So that's sort of how I've come full circle from having an inflamed pericardium to being the coach I am today.
It reminds me of a story I heard from a friend who went on a date with a woman who was beautiful and fit and seemingly wonderful. And they go out on a date and she's drinking a lot. And he's like, maybe she's a lush, maybe she's a drunk. And after she wasn't eating that much, and then after too much wine, and, thank God she was in the care of my friend, who's a sweet guy, she just starts bawling, crying. And she lifts up her shirt and shows her scars from her stomach, stapling surgery or whatever they call it. Mm-hmm. And the thing is, she was still the fat, ashamed person on the inside, right? You can go to that great length and lose all that weight and look the pillar of, you would never have known that she was once obese. But wow, in her mind, she still was, it was still trauma from that, which is just exemplifies what you're talking about. And then I also wonder too, I see people train for triathlons all the time. So I'm a swimmer and I can always tell when there's a triathlon person, they're always struggling with the swimming.
Really.
Yeah. They're always terrible at swimming. And I'm always like, hey, do you need a tip? Are you training for triathlon? They're like, how do you know? It's everyone's weakest sport usually. But what I wonder sometimes is I've talked to some people who've done triathlons, and I know, like, you love it for the race aspect, but there is this part of me that questions, are a lot of people in this just for the ego of it? And not that there's anything totally wrong with that, but again, it kind of goes back to a little bit of what you're saying, like, what's your goal with this? And maybe the goal needs to be refined or sharpened up in some way that is healthier.
There's a really interesting question that we kind of forget to ask ourselves sometimes when we're coming up with these drastic solutions, like when somebody right. decides they want to do an Ironman race, or they decide they're going to give up, they're going to go keto, or and there's nothing wrong with doing an Ironman. There's nothing wrong with being keto. But when we're coming up with these solutions, I like to ask people, what problem are you trying to solve? Because a lot of the time, the problem that we're actually trying to solve, or the root cause of what's making us or spurring us on to do these extreme things isn't what we think it is. And then the next question after the what problem are you trying to solve is, and this is a common practice in cognitive behavior theory, is to ask 5 whys. And so you ask yourself or the person why, and you need to do this at least 5 times. Sometimes it takes more to really get to that root. So let's say there's that person in the swim lane next to you who's decided they want to do an Ironman, and you say, oh, okay, so you want to do an Ironman. So what problem are you trying to solve with this race? And I say, oh, well, I really want to just knock this off my bucket list. This is something I've always dreamed of doing. I'm like, oh, well, why is that? And they say, well, it's a monumental achievement. It'll show that I'm dedicated to an endeavor and that I follow through on it, no matter how hard it is. Oh, well, why is that important to you? Well, because it shows that I'm the kind of person who sticks to things. Oh, well, why is that important to you? And you can see each one of the whys digs a little bit deeper and gets a little bit deeper. And then at the end, maybe by the 5th why, the reason is I don't have self-confidence. I really want to feel more confident in my own abilities. And it's like, okay, well, that is a really great endeavor. Is doing an Ironman triathlon really
do you need the Ironman
to achieve that?
Yeah.
It's probably not the greatest way to achieve that. And I know a lot of people who've finished those kinds of races and still have that underlying problem because it's not actually addressing the issue. So yeah,
it's the same for any addiction, really, isn't it? Anything, or in terms of, you can stop drinking, but are you dealing with the behavior and the issues in your life that led you to maybe being an alcoholic, or right? Like, again, getting to the core root of, as we do in health as well, in functional medicine, which is really important. Let's get to the root of it, because maybe from there, maybe you can save yourself from an Ironman.
Right.
That's how I hate running.
Or do it because you really want to. You do it for fun, not out of desperation.
Yeah. And it's funny because I think too, especially in the health space, when you've been suffering also with a health issue for a while, again, it could be likened to the example I gave of the woman who had her stomach stapled and was still sort of in the fat mindset of all of that. The same thing happens with health. You've been sick for so long, you almost don't know what good feels like. You start to blame your body, which, as you and I know, your body's always trying to save you at every minute, and you start to treat it like an enemy. And those are the kind of things that get imprinted, in your psyche when you're struggling sometimes, unless you're really addressing the mindset. And then afterwards, of course, also addressing it too and making peace with it. Because you can take a thyroid hormone and get better, and you can exercise and lose weight. But again, it's not really getting in there. What are some good examples, obviously keeping them anonymous, of some ways in which this has helped people you've worked with and some of the discoveries they've come to?
Well, I have this program called Way Less, and just to go back to your stomach stapling, the gastric bypass surgery. A lot of surgeons nowadays who do that type of surgery use a program like Way Less or another lifestyle behavior habit change program in conjunction with the gastric bypass, because they've come to realize that without changing the belief system and the habits, the lifestyle, you can have the surgery and still regain all the weight. Because like you said, like you were alluding to there, that if you don't actually change the behavior, you can take the pill or you can do the exercise, you can have the surgery, but the underlying problem is still there. And often that ends up rebounding in a way like gaining the weight back, or further, I don't know, hurting your thyroid or any of those sorts of activities. So we see in the Weight Loss program a number of people who come in who have had some sort of intervention in the past and have realized or have been told that exact thing, that until they change the lifestyle and until they change their belief around that, well, the narrative that they're giving themselves, they're never really going to achieve their goal. And it's going to always be a temporary solution. And like you said, with the alcohol as well, that's one of the big things. A lot of people who come into the Way Less program also struggle with their relationship with alcohol, thinking that all they need to do is stop drinking. And it's such a common belief that somehow we've made alcohol the villain, but alcohol doesn't actually do anything. It's not egging us on. It's not the problem. Our problem is the belief that we need the alcohol, or the reason that the drink calls to us. It's not alcohol's fault. It's our belief system that around alcohol, or around what we want it to do, or what role it fills in our life. And we can't solve that by doing a 90-day challenge or a 60-day challenge or something where we just avoid the cheesecake or the alcohol or whatever it happens to be. We need to really address those things, and it's become such a big source of joy in my life, seeing people have those light bulb moments when all of a sudden they're like, wait a second, that cheesecake has no power over me. Like, I'm in control, not the cheesecake. And I get tingles just thinking about that, because it seems like such a small thing to realize that my free will is a factor. But I think we do spend so much of our lives thinking that some other thing controls us. And when we realize that it's all within our own control to choose and to vet the things that we do and put in our bodies and do to ourselves, it really has become a great source of joy for me. And I want everybody in the world to experience it in one way or another.
Let's talk about it. So how long is the program? Is it self-guided? Give us the nitty-gritty of how the Way Less program works.
Well, we actually sat down and thought we were going to make it into, I think at first it was we were going to make it a 2-month program. And then it very quickly was like, oh, well, we can't get through all the material we want to cover in 2 months. So I think it's going to be 4, then it was 6, and it ended up being a year-long program, partially because there's so many things that we want to cover, but also because this work takes time.
Yeah.
And I think we tend to rush through things. We want everything to be an immediate solution. And really, in my experience, the quicker the solution, the more temporary it probably is going to be. If you don't spend the time to let these changes and these habits actually become the new normal, they're always going to be somewhat temporary. Because you think about how long we've spent, like me, I'm 50 now. I've spent 50 years developing some of these bad habits. I'm not going to undo them in a 30-day challenge. So the program is a year long. And a lot of people end up sticking with us beyond that, because they know they've only scratched the surface at a certain point there. And sure, they could do the work on their own after that. But I think having some support and having the backbone sort of still in place really does help them along. But you don't have to sign up for a program like Way Less to achieve this kind of stuff. We can do this on our own if we accept the fact that small changes done over not days, not weeks, months, probably years, are where we're really going to get the lasting benefits, and where we're really going to see the changes. And I know that seems painful and it seems kind of depressing, I think, for a lot of people. They want the change now, but we've got to start realizing that thinking in long term and thinking in manageable chunks, like it's like the old saying of how do you eat an elephant one bite at a time. It's true, and that's really going to get us so much more happiness, so much more lasting achievement than any of the just sort of little interventions. And we can use those little interventions to spur us on. I don't mean to throw them all under the bus and say that they're worthless. I do Sober October every October. This will be my, I think, 4th year of doing Sober October, even though I don't have a drinking problem. I don't have an issue with alcohol, but just spending that time doing those short interventions can sometimes fuel the more long-lasting endeavors. So not to say that they're worthless, but we need to look at them in a different way. We need to ask the question. I'm full of questions here. We need to ask the question, then what, when we start those kinds of things? And I think that's a thing that I noticed a lot of the time, people signing up for a marathon, people wanting to signing up for CrossFit, they forget to ask the question, then what? Like after I do 90 days of CrossFit and I've gotten bored with the workouts, or I've moved on, or I've gotten injured, or whatever it happens to be. Sorry, CrossFit, I'm picking on you, but
well, they have a lot of injuries, so
they do. Or a marathon. It's like, okay, so you're going to do this marathon, then what? And we forget to do that with the, let's say, Sober October. Every Sober October, I don't just stop drinking for 30 days. I look at what I'm actually going to try to achieve in those 30 days. And last year, I actually did a really deep dive into trying to find all the craft beer places that were in sort of a 200 kilometer radius of where I live, because there's not a lot of them around. So I'd extend the radius a little bit, that were non-alcoholic. So I just found all these delicious non-alcoholic beers in those 30 days that I could then fall back on for the rest of the year. But I think it's so important to figure out, what are you trying to do during those times that you will then continue to do and be able to rely on further? The good old, like I said, the then what question. And it's a bit of a mind shift, I guess, in terms of, we want these short interventions to just magically make a difference, but we have to do it intentionally, and we have to know why we're doing it and what we're trying to achieve, other than just abstaining from alcohol or whatever the challenge tends to be.
And I cannot impress upon the audience enough the power of the accountability of joining this type of program. I even myself, as a coach, someone who is highly productive, I get a lot of shit done and knock it out. But I also have benefited greatly from being a part of a program where I'm accountable, where I can check in. And again, that the year-long program, I mean, that's really going to get you there, because I would ask everyone, like, have the quick fixes work for you? I've never seen them work for myself or anyone else.
Yeah,
And literally, in all of our years of doing this stuff, I don't think I've ever seen anyone have a quick fix really work and be sustainable, again, because of the things you're talking about. So it's so important. Tell us again, too, we'll put everything in the show notes, but quickly, where can we go to sign up and find more information about the Way Less program?
Well, it's easy to find. wayless.life is the website. And unfortunately, we are just starting our year-long program. At the time that we're recording this, we're actually starting it in a couple of weeks. So it won't happen again until the fall, but that gives you plenty of time to look at some of the other offerings we have. We have a 7-day mindset reset, and we've got an impulse control mini course, and some other little things that you can start off and get you going in the right direction. But the year-long program, we only do twice a year, just to make sure that we get the right amount of people and the right people into the program. And we do have a lot of hands-on coaching meetings and stuff. So it's a really fun group. And you're absolutely right about the accountability aspect of things. As long as we realize that we have to be more accountable to ourselves than we are to anyone else, there's an issue with making somebody else the slave driver. That we've all probably tried, or we've heard of the accountability buddies, and those people that you don't want to let down by not showing up for the golf trip or the Zumba class or something, because you have this group that's looking forward, or join a running group because they're going to keep you accountable. But those are all temporary as well, unless we realize that, unless we take the time to make sure that we're doing this for ourselves first and foremost. This, whatever we're getting involved in, whatever goal we're trying to achieve, has to be for ourselves. We are talking a lot about, there are a lot of shoulds in the world. We're told that we should lose weight, or that we should be cleaning up our diet, or we should be getting more exercise. But until it stops being a should and becomes an actual meaningful driver for yourself, then you're always just going to be on the cusp of giving up. As soon as that accountability buddy moves or loses their interest in it as well, then we're back to square one. So as much as I believe accountability is really, really helpful and can definitely support an otherwise very helpful program, we still have to spend that time making sure that we're really doing this for ourselves. And often that means spending some time doing those 5 whys and really finding that deeper reason for why we want to do this, why this is actually important for us, not just lip service, not just doing it because our doctor told us to, but actually doing it for ourselves.
I love it. Let's talk a little bit about Upgraded Fitness podcast. Tell us what you have in store for us on this.
Well, I've pretty much everything that I've talked about so far is in this episode with you, Elle, is the sort of the backbone of the Upgraded Fitness podcast. Now, for years, I was the Get Fit guy on the Quick and Dirty Tips network, and I had a wonderful time for 4 years doing deep dives into all the latest trends in fitness and dissecting workouts and stuff. And I'll continue to do that because I really love it. But again, because I've realized the value of making sure that the mindset is in place as much as the workout is in place, the focus of that podcast is really both of those things. And that's why it's Upgraded Fitness. And it's not just fitness anymore. We're taking it to the next level of making sure our mind is as engaged as our body, and that we're doing things in a very sustainable and meaningful way, not just, I've done the whole thing where I try to put on 30 pounds of muscle in as short amount of time as possible, those stunts, and they're fun and all, but you can do that from a Men's Health magazine. You don't need me for that. So I'm taking it to a much more meaningful level in my opinion.
I love it. And, I'm sure that, look, I know there's many because you've worked with so many people over the years and have witnessed so many transformations of health. What's one or two that really stand out to you where the person either thought they were hopeless, right? The people that come and they're like, I'm beyond repair, and that kind of stuff. But tell us about like some of one or two of maybe some of the greatest 180s that you've seen with people who have really changed it around for themselves.
Well, I guess we had a wonderful aha moment, and I hope, well, I'll keep the person anonymous, of course, because it was in one of our private coaching groups that we had this moment. But there was a member of our Way Less program who has spent the better part of the year just struggling with this idea that a sugar addiction is her biggest problem. And that was the thing that was holding her back, is she just couldn't get away from her sugar addiction. And we had this wonderful moment where, and this is one of those things that I think is kind of my superpower in some ways. And it's one that I've worked really hard on over the years, is making sure that I'm hearing what the person means, not what the person is saying. When people ask you a question and you're like, that's not actually what you're asking me, is it? Well, she was explaining how I got her to dive a little deeper into this sugar addiction. And at a certain point in the conversation, she said something along the lines of, I start off the day with all these great intentions, and I pack myself a healthy lunch and I eat a healthy breakfast. And by the time lunch comes around, I'm so tired and defeated and sad that all I want to do is eat all the sugar. So I go and buy a bag of candy and a 2-liter of Coke and end up having that instead of my healthy lunch that I've packed for myself, because I'm so addicted to sugar. And I was like, wait, what did you say? And she said, because I'm addicted to sugar. I'm like, no, go back a little bit. You said by noon, you're so tired and defeated and depressed that you throw out your healthy lunch and then you're telling this story of being addicted to sugar. But the problem isn't sugar. The problem is that you're so tired and defeated and depressed by the time noon rolls around that that's what's kicking off this whole problem. The problem it's not about sugar. It's about what's going on in your life. And we had a good cry. And then over the next few weeks, we really delved into what she can do in her workplace so she doesn't feel tired and defeated and depressed by the time noon rolls around, because that was obviously the problem, not a sugar addiction. And those kind of things are just so powerful when somebody can realize that and actually start to address the real problem instead of just falling back on a, I don't want to call it a cliche, because I know sugar addiction can be an issue, but I honestly think that the majority of people who are experiencing that or are labeling themselves as some sort of addict, there's much more going on in their lives than just an addiction. So that was a real beautiful moment for me. And she really has turned things around. Of course, you can't change your relationship with your coworkers or your boss, or you can't just quit your job the next day. We have bills to pay and stuff, but she's on the road. She's definitely making changes and is able to, because she's seeing that now, the sugar isn't as appealing as it had been as well, because she's getting to that point in her day where she's reaching for the 2 liter of pop. And she's like, oh, wait, no, I don't need to do that anymore, because I know it's not about the pop. I know it's about so-and-so talked down to me earlier today, or I had that really annoying phone call, or that's what's going on, and the allure of the sugar becomes less and less. And the, like I said before, the you have no power over me kind of command that we can exhibit is much more helpful.
So aside from wayless.life for your awesome program and others that you have, how else can we connect with you? Obviously, we can go anywhere and find Upgraded Fitness podcast. Tell us your personal website so that we can also learn more about you. And of course, we'll put everything in the show notes.
Yeah, it's super easy. Brock Armstrong, BROCK Armstrong, no relation to Lance.com, so brockarmstrong.com. Although, you know what? I would be okay with being related to Lance.
Would you really though? Would you though, after all of his BS with the doping and the whole nightmare?
I think we could do some work. Lance, if you're listening.
Might need some of your coaching on the non-health side of things.
Yeah. Actually, I'd rather be related to Louis. That would have been way cooler. Or Neil, for that matter.
I was going to say Neil would have been really maybe the one.
But yeah, brockarmstrong.com. That's where I have links to my Scientific American articles, my Change Academy podcast, which we didn't even mention, but there's a lot. I'm going to throw a lot of stuff out there. So just brockarmstrong.com is the hub for everything.
I love it. Well, thank you so much. And is there anything lasting words you'd like to leave with our audience?
No, I think what we discussed earlier, remembering to ask yourself some questions and challenge your own beliefs, because you can change them. It doesn't matter how ingrained you think your beliefs are. You have the power to change them, and it can really make a difference in your life. So just take that time, make the effort, and it'll help. I promise.
Yeah. And you know what? This is really the time to get with Brock's podcast and also his programs, because listen, this pandemic is brutal, and it has shown us, if anything, that, listen, a lot of us have comorbidities and things that can affect us. And while doing all the work on your health won't necessarily prevent you from getting COVID, we do know that it's important to have a good baseline of foundation. And I think the past couple of years have scared the bejesus out of a lot of people who are unhealthy, who are like, I might be on this end of the spectrum here. So if you're feeling that way, it's never too late. And maybe this really is the time in life to get it together finally, once and for all. So thank you so much for all of your work. And just for being literally one of the most wonderful people in the health industry that I've met over this past decade. Always. I mean, just amazing. And thank you so much again. And we will put everything to connect with you in the show notes. And for everyone else, we'll see you next week. Hey listeners, over the years, a ton of companies have approached me to collaborate, but I will only promote companies whose products I believe in and that I actually use and consume on a regular basis. So let me tell you about some of my favorite companies that I can offer you discounts for. Rep Provisions, an amazing company doing incredible things for our planet, topsoil, and animals with regenerative agriculture, and it's my #1 source for quality pasture-raised meat and chicken. Visit repprovisions.com and use code L15 for 15% off. I'm also obsessed with a company called Carnivore Crisps. They make a lean, all-natural, and delicious alternative to conventional snacking, made with just real meat and real salt. Totally addictive, and my favorite ones are the beef brisket and the ribeye. Visit carnivorecrisps.com and use code PALEO10 for 10% off. I also love and regularly use Paleo Valley products. They make amazing supplements and delicious paleo products. I use the superfood greens powder, grass-fed beef sticks, the organ complex, and their bone broth bars. I love the lemon and apple. I also use their essential C complex and more. Visit paleovalley.com/promos/Elle Russ for 15% off. I also love Primal Kitchen. They make delicious paleo-approved, gluten-free, grain-free, soy-free, and no refined sugar products, and I use them daily, from their collagen powders and sauces and marinades to their avocado and olive oil. So good, so healthy. Visit primalkitchen.com and use code L10 for 10% off. I also love paleo powder and use it almost on everything I cook. They make incredible seasoning blends, and they also have these incredible grain-free coatings that feel just like crispy breadings that you would have had prior to knowing that there's another way. So visit paleopowder.com and use code L15 for 15% off.